Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with decorated jazz multi-instrumentalist and composer Roger Glenn. We took a deep dive into his new 2025 CD, My Latin Heart, and explored the many flavors and deep angles that went into this production of artistic vision and the players, along with so much more. He is known as Ingredient X, or the secret sauce, or the cat behind the cat. Now, after decades of elevating the music of bona fide legends in jazz, Latin jazz, blues, and funk, the most versatile, singular, multi-instrumental master is stepping out of the shadows and into the spotlight with his first new album in 4 decades. With credits on more than 40 albums, he has not been hiding, he's just been waiting. We cover all of the depths. Enjoy this interview. Great to meet you.
Same here, same here.
Thank you for taking a minute. I love the album. I love your music. I'm looking forward to getting into it. So I appreciate your time today.
Oh, I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So I'll tell you what, before we get into the album, I want to know this. 5 years ago, this pandemic rocked all of us, changed our lives, especially musicians. How did you get through the pandemic, and how did it change the way that you approach music now?
Wow. Well, well, I still have the desire, that's for sure, to perform. It was, it was a real dark period in regards to being able to play. I was playing at home more, working. That's where I started playing bass, just staying at home. And so my brother gave me a guitar many years ago, and I carried it around for years, and I started playing that. And then I realized that the last 4 strings of the guitar is like a bass. And I was over at Taj Mahal's house and in Berkeley, and we went over to this guitar subway guitar. That's my wife in the background, Beth. I call her the parrot at times because she's always there for me. So Taj and I were just over at this guitar place around the corner, and we were jamming, and I bought a bass there, and that was the start of it. So I spent my time, during not going anywhere, not performing anywhere, and just at home playing.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about My Latin Heart. I mean, start to finish, this is a wonderful album. What was kind of the vision that you had for this project?
Well, I had this opportunity to go into the studio and record something that I would do, as opposed to doing it for making other people hits, as they put it. And this album represents part of my travels throughout life. People who I've worked with, such as, Cal Jader, Cal's Wahida. I had him in mind when I composed that song. And just each song really has a history with me in so many ways. Cal's Wahida with Cal Jader, going on with let me just go through this list, because it's it's like Cal's Wahida, and then I have Zambo's Mambo first off. How did that come about? Well, I composed a song, and I love to dance also. So it's a mambo rhythm, and I was saying, well, it's mambo, and I just tried to rhyme a song with mambo, and it came up Zombo. Little did I realize, and in a way, later on, looking at it, that it is Zombos were African Americans who got away from slavery times, and hooked up with Native Americans, and their offsprings are called zombos. So there's a history in that. So uh, that's sort of an after effect of this song, but in investigating more, it came up to that. Um, Brother Marshall. Brother Marshall was based on, I played a funeral for in San Francisco, and for this teacher who had passed away, and some of the musicians who I was working with uh, were his students. So he had inspired the next generation, stuff like that. They're great musicians, and so I dedicated that song to the teachers of the world. Brother Marshall, what he did for these people, taking their music to the next generation. Um, a night of love is a night of love. What more can I say?
Yeah.
Energizer. I I I I had composed that song quite a while ago, um, and so it really stuck because I love I came up with this bass line, and from there the rest is history. But it was really energizing. It's an energizing song to me. And where did I come up with the name Energizer? I guess one night I was looking at, some commercial, and Energizer Bunny, just keeps going and going. And so that's how I came up with that. Now, the next one, Congo Square, is a little bit deeper. Um, um, and I talk about this when I'm performing about this song. Congo Square to me, because I'm really into the roots of music in the Americas. And, we speak of jazz. Jazz is a combination of music from Africa and music from Europe. Jazz couldn't have been created in Europe. It couldn't have been created in Africa. It took those two cultures together to create the music that we have in the Americas. And one of those places where these cultures come together is New Orleans. And so that to me is sort of, especially in the jazz community, where the initial roots are in this country, and obviously, um, you know, that came about later on in life with Louis Armstrong, and he was from New Orleans, and working with my father, the two of them, Tyree Glenn, it just it impacted me because I look at the music. I do a show called Music of the Americas, basically, and I try to illustrate how different cultures come together to create the music that we enjoy to this day. The roots of all of that. I've performed and I've been in Cuba, and you analyze, that's Spain. And when we speak of Africa, that's the other thing. Before I even get into this deeper, we speak of Europe. We talk about, if I mention English music, German music, French music, Spanish music, um, Greek music in Europe, you get pictures, images of what that music sounds like. But when we speak of Africa, we don't necessarily look at the individual countries or cultures or tribes that created the music, the difference between the different tribes. So, for example, Brazilian music is a combination of Portuguese and Africans from Angola. The slave trade. You see where that initially affected the music. Even in South America, so majority of the slave trade, when you look at it from that point of view, majority of the slaves are coming from Angola, different kind of music. In Cuba and in the United States, for example, Nigerian or Senegalese uh, African slaves that came mixed in with Spanish culture. In this country, in the United States, there's also a religious aspect that's different than Cuba or even Brazil when we talk about, Catholic religion in Cuba and in Brazil and how that came about. The European religious culture into religious African cultures and how that blended in the United States here in New Orleans. We have uh, mainly later on Protestant culture in which the music developed differently here. The significance of Congo Square was because of the conservatism of Protestant religion. The only time the slaves could play their drums is on a Sunday. So what congas were not really integrated into our United States staple of instrument. It developed differently than it did in Cuba, that as it developed differently in Brazil. So, it's these cultures from these two continents, Africa and Europe initially, we were talking about, that created the music, let alone the indigenous people here who are creating music themselves and integrating that into our American culture. And I use that term differentiating from when I say American, culture. It's these various influences, and the thing with jazz, as with Latin jazz, the concept of being in the moment, an oral tradition in Africa versus a written tradition, written music and stuff like that in Europe, is an interesting dynamic between the two, those two cultures in general. So for me, in terms of jazz and Latin jazz in this country, Congo Square plays a very important role of how the music developed here versus how the music developed in Cuba versus music developing in Haiti. And when you look at the history of all of this, even in Cuban music, what, danzón, I don't know if you're into Latin music to that extent, but, you hear like danzón with violins, and how did that come about? In terms of Cuban music, has been a lot of percussion and guitars, Spanish influence. But when the Haitian Revolution happened and slave owners left Haiti and some went to the southern, eastern part of Cuba, they brought their slaves with them. And Haiti is a French speaking country. And so French influence in terms of how that developed into mixing that what was going on in Cuba versus Spanish, and you have that coming together, and it's the same thing in New Orleans. The different cultures. All these songs really revolve around the cultures, but especially for me, it's very dear in regards to Congo Square as far as music is concerned here, because I see those roots, and I've been fortunate uh, to know some of these people who were the start of jazz scene here in the United States. So it has that effect on me. Angola was the next song. Angola, like I said, a lot of slaves were coming in from Angola into the Americas. I had an opportunity to play at the Angola prison. Two things here. So I, you know, I was very sensitive to the fact that, in Louisiana, they have very strict laws. It's like, it reminds me of um, uh, Pigmeat Markham, who would, here comes the judge, if you're familiar with him. It was a comedian, black comedian, and his thing was judges hired in the Georgia Pine today. Everybody's going to do time. What's the next case on the docket so I can give them from now on? From now on, you're in prison, and playing in Angola, uh, they have very hard sentences there. Uh, and so you look at the history of that prison system. In Angola, by the way, formerly before, it was a plantation. So um, there's all of that. Slaves were at the plantation working, um, and so you look at that. And I'm also familiar with the country of Angola and what it was going through. There was the war between, um, uh, well, the Cubans were fighting the South Africans in Angola. This is more recent history, and they reached a point where uh, they were at a point. Well, it's time to negotiate, and they had a negotiation. And the result of that, like the Cubans said, okay, we'll leave, and let the country exist. If you guys pull out of South Africa, South Africans pull out of Angola. But what we're asking is, while you do that, you also free Mandela. And so things develop there. So Angola has a dual significance, the culture that they brought to the Americas and Brazil, and also the prison system up in the United States at Angola prison. And so there's a lot of cultural exchanges. That's why is Brazilian music different from Cuban music that's different from, United States? And you put all these things together. Argentina is different from Brazilian music, but um, how did that come about? Highly Italian influences also. So I'm talking about cultures and how the music affects and creates new cultures. So there's that, and also my love of Brazil that I went. The first time I was there was down there with Dizzy Gillespie, and we performed. We performed, and I had always loved Brazilian music, and here was my chance to be in Brazil and love music. And we played there for a few weeks, and this is the first time I was down there, and the gig ended, and I stayed a month later just hanging out, in Rio and places like that. And it was around the time of New Year's, and in Rio, um, they have Carnival later on in what is it in March. But between New Year's and Carnival, they're partying. I mean, the traffic jams, you can't drive a car, forget it. You're gonna have to walk because everybody's partying in the streets and stuff like that. So I really had a taste of what Rio would be like at Carnival. Um, so that's sort of a cross section of the inspirations of these songs. But my main thing is how how music of the Americas has evolved, and being able to see that and understanding from whence it came. It just it inspired me in regards to these songs.
So, what are you hoping the listener gets from this album?
Well, aside from enjoyment, and also maybe getting people out again and start dancing, because they represent not only, lyrically nice and, pleasing to sit, but, it's also, it's the spirit of getting out there again. You ask about, since the pandemic, people need to have the desire to interact with people. And hopefully this, this CD will show that and get people dancing again, get people to go out and hear music again. I look forward to a result of being able to travel and play my music and pass those ideas that I just talked about in people's head to realize that we're all one. And it would be nice to especially in the world that we're living in, to involve, make middle America realize that our culture also is part of Latin America,
Mm-hmm.
and we can't escape that. I mean, there are things even in the Bible Belt, that have African origins. The call and response that you see in some Latin music. In Cuba, they call it choral inspiration, where someone will be they'll the soloist will be saying something and the chorus will be backing them up. Celia Cruz, for example, when she's talking about "Ah, bo mi bomba," I said no, and that's the chorus singing, and
Yeah.
she would be singing on top of that gospel music in the United States. Jesus on the main line, tell him what you want. Well, I was walking down the street last night. That's the soloist with the chorus singing. And those roots go back to African culture
Yeah.
that we have, that we show that lineage of that, this world. And I haven't even started to discuss the Asian influence in regards to the music. The instrument that I play, by the way, the vibraphone is the precursor to that was the xylophone and marimbas, which is a chromatic instrument, but the predecessor to that was the bilophone from Africa, which was more like a pentatonic instrument, 5 note pentatonic instrument. I always use as an example the song "Amazing Grace." It's alleged that the song da 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 da,
Yeah.
it's a pentatonic melody, and it is alleged that because it's written by James Newton. You'll look it up. It says lyrics by James Newton, melody traditional.
Yeah.
It is, and James Newton was a slave ship captain, and the words reflect that. He once was lost as a slave ship captain, but now he's been saved. He got religious, and so that changed him. But it was alleged that he heard the music of the slaves on the ship going to in the middle passage coming to the Americas. So there is that influence of two cultures coming together. But the other thing is with the history of the vibes, like I was saying, from the slaves had the bilophone, pentatonic. Bring it to the Americas, we get into chromatic scale, European side. History, so bilophone to marimbas, to vibraphones, to even electronic vibes that are, triggers looks like a regular keyboard, but you hit it with a mallet and it triggers a synthesize or sample sound that you can play stuff there. But let me take it back even further than that, because the other thing is, when this was after the war. I mean, I was in the Army during the Vietnam era, but I went to Vietnam later on after the war, and when I was there, I came across an instrument that was made out of bamboo that was set like a vibraphone or a marimba. But the silk trade, the silk trade going way back, of bringing Asian influences into Africa, there was an instrument that was a metal instrument that was introduced into Africa. So, you this is one planet, but it has many inputs from different cultures that have influenced the world in so many different ways.
Yeah. Well, and that's a beautiful overview of the album. We've really spent the time. Hopefully we can do a part two. I'd like to kind of get into your career a little bit, but I want to put links up to the show notes, and for any live shows, I will make sure to put that up. So if there's any way we could reconvene and kind of get into your career, this has been a wonderful, this has been a wonderful overview of the album. So thank you so much for taking a minute out and really shedding light on the very many layers that go into this album. It's been a joy to play it on the show. I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Well, let me just say one thing. Some of the musicians I selected on this album, we have been working together in various ways, on and off. Ray Oviedo, David Beloved, Paul van Valkenhagen, Derek Rolando, John Santos, Michael Spiro. I've known these people for years, and that was the other great thing about bringing them together and creating this.
That's wonderful. Well, I'll have all this in the show notes. This was so great to catch up with you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I left out David K. Matthews also.
Okay. Yeah, he's wonderful. Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much. I will we'll reconvene and do a part two, but thank you so much for this wonderful overview of a seminal album. I've loved having it on the show, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening and tuning into another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and minds in LA, New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Roger for coming on by the show. If you want to hear more Neon Jazz interviews, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to us at YouTube, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to theneonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends. Hey Jazz fans, Joe Domino of Neon Jazz here. Proud to let you know about the triumphant return of the Kansas City Blues and Jazz Festival to Legends Field at the home of the KC Monarchs, with a stellar lineup. Grammy-winning Stanley Clarke, Carl Denson's Tiny Universe, jazz master Bill Frisell, and KC luminaries Jackie Myers and Brody Buster. Tickets and more for this electrifying two-day event is found at monarchsbaseball.com, then click on special events. This October 3rd and 4th, join us as we bring magic and music back to Kansas City.
Neon Jazz.